In my primer video for Final Fantasy on the NES, I mentioned elements that start in this game and carry over throughout the franchise. I'm going to be making notes of these elements with a little symbol on the side of the screen. I'm going to be using a special symbol for elements that don't show up again until Final Fantasy XIV, which borrows heavily from its predecessors. As we head due north towards MATOYA'S cave, here's a look at the host of enemies that we will encounter in the Pravoka area. Most of the more difficult enemies are going to be southeast of Pravoka, but take special note of the enemies that cause status effects just by attacking you. Welcome to MATOYA'S cave, and to a song that is not repeated until Final Fantasy XIV. The brooms look like they're speaking gibberish, but if you read those letters backwards, it gives us a handy ability that we can use outside. You have to go around MATOYA'S table to talk to her. We will make a note that MATOYA has lost the crystal that allows her to see, and these treasure chests are up for grabs. Now, if you read what the brooms say backwards, it's actually push B select. Now, if you do that inside a cave, you will just go to the regular battle formation menu. But if you step outside, then hold B and press select, you will see the world map. Your current location is noted here, and then the other flashing symbols on the map are other locations: towns, caves, castles, dungeons. And notice how the northeast continent looks like a hawk. We start the walk towards Pravoka now, but the upcoming random encounter is a significant one. 3 enemies and 4 of us. Notice how the 2 mages attack the same enemy. If the first character defeats the enemy, the second character will still attack the same monster, wasting an attack. This adds a level of strategy, but it was adjusted in future installments, which I think serves immersion better, giving your characters a little bit more common sense. So how do you feel about the limited places to save your game? When I was younger, I did not like it. But now that I'm older, I like the level of caution and strategy that it adds to the game. Thinking about where you're at, how many items you have, how many spells your mages have left, should you go back to town first? I like the extra challenge. I'm not going to be a cranky old man and go on a tangent about saving your game at any place and time, but I will say that I think it's gotten out of hand. I'll leave it at that. Welcome to the port town of Pravoka. And we immediately see trouble. Now we've just come off a long journey, so let's go to the inn before we address these pirates. And even before that, let's talk about what the shops in Pravoka have to offer. Notice on the left column that I specify which class can equip which weapon and armor, but I am not including the class upgrades. If a fighter can equip something, a knight can also equip it. So I'm not going to add those class upgrades, just understand that. But the same is not true in reverse. There are some pieces of equipment that only class upgrades can equip. Now here's a note about the ninja when it comes to weapons. If it's not the wizard staff or the Excalibur, the ninja can equip it. And when it comes to armor, there are certain class-specific gear, like the white and black wizards have their own robes, the fighters have steel armor, and the knights have opal, dragon, and aegis armor. If it's not any of those, the ninja can equip it. So I'm not going to make a note of what the ninja can equip on the shop charts. Just assume that he can. Now let's talk about what Pravoka has to offer. The short sword is going to be your best weapon for your fighter or red mage, but the scimitar is going to be a more budget-friendly improvement. The hand axe might seem appealing at first because it has one more point of damage than the short sword, but notice that its hit percentage is half that of the short sword. So not only will it miss more often, but it's going to take longer to start hitting enemies more than once in a single attack. As far as the armor goes, a wooden shield and a glove for each party member would do you well. And if you have the money, the iron armor will be excellent for your fighter. When it comes to the black and white abilities, I like to go for ice, dark, and slow because, due to a bug, temper does not work. And as far as the white abilities go, my only recommendation is A-Lit, which increases the party's lightning resistance. It will be a very useful ability. Now, take note that whether you use dark or slow depends on the enemies you're going to fight, and slow is 20% more accurate than dark. I'm going to demonstrate dark in the upcoming fight. Let's go get these pirates. Pirates are a running theme throughout the Final Fantasy franchise, whether they are sky or sea pirates. I don't know if that's Bick or Bicky or Bickay, but I'm going to call him Bick. We have a bunch of enemies. They're not that difficult as you can see by the stats, but there is a large group of them. So we're going to cast Dark, which lowers their hit percentage by 20%, but also makes them 20% easier for you to hit. It just takes forever to see the animation cover so many enemies. Now you may notice that Dark is not successful on every enemy. Where the little announcements go, if it says darkness, it's successful. If it says ineffective, it missed. Now slow would not have any point against these guys because they only hit you once per attack. But if they did hit you multiple times per attack, I would use slow rather than dark because slow reduces their hits to 1 per attack. Okay, spoiler alert, I won. Some of these battles, they just take way too long. After the fight, be sure to talk to Bick again. Now that the pirates aren't menacing the town anymore, the townspeople have come out, and we have information to glean. A connection between Matoya and Elfland. A picture is coming together of what our next quest should be. Down on this side of town is the item shop and the armor shop. And then over here on the other side of town, the right side, would be our clinic, mage, and weapon shop. And then an old man in the top right corner that has more information for us. Another report. The town of Melmond in trouble. Now before we head out onto our ship, we're going to take a look at what has been named the Peninsula of Power, headed this way to the east and north of Pravoka. But on the way to the Peninsula of Power, we will get into a significant battle. In this battle, we will see an enemy cause paralysis for the first time. We also get to see Cow use her harm spell, and we see what happens when a character falls in battle. Unfortunately, Cow's first attempt at the harm spell was interrupted by paralysis. Now, a character has a 25% chance on their turn to recover from paralysis. Unfortunately, Cow did not get that chance. Now Cow does get that chance. Now our first warrior, Omaru, falls in battle. We're going to continue trying to wrap this fight up. These enemies are actually pretty good for money and experience points. And if Cal was able to get that harm spell off on the first turn, it's very likely this battle would have been over already. And if I haven't already mentioned it, harm only works against undead monsters, skeletons, zombies, and the like. And now Miko wraps things up. Now here's a frustrating point for me who likes symmetry. The experience gained from battle is divided between the 4 light warriors, but because Omaru fell, his experience is divided and given to the other 3. Now everyone is 1 level ahead of him, and they will no longer all level at the same time. So, we're going to take our pretty sad-looking crew back to Pravoka. When you go back to raise an ally who's fallen in battle, make sure you go to the clinic first, because the inn will not raise your ally. And then when you go to the clinic, your character is raised with only 1 hit point. So, when you have a fallen ally, clinic first, then the inn. Now we're going to head back to the Peninsula of Power, and this is how it works. There is a mapping error, if you would call it that, to where the northern tip of this continent actually dips into a higher level area's enemies. It's the top 4 tiles of that peninsula. Now before I demonstrate this, I'm going to use a cabin and save the game, because at these levels, my party has no chance of winning. Now the way to utilize the Peninsula of Power is to get in fights with enemies around the lower Pravoka area, and even go into the next town, Elfland, and pick up Fire 2, and then when you get just strong enough, you can start defeating enemies in the Peninsula of Power and really rake in the experience points and the gold. I don't know if I would call this game breaking, especially now with the Pixel remaster of this game. They give you the option to quadruple the experience points that enemies give you. They also give you the option to quadruple how much gold they drop. So if that's not game breaking, I don't know what is. But I kind of see where they're coming from. I played Final Fantasy IV with a younger gamer, and he could not stand the concept of random encounters. And in the Pixel remasters, they give you the option to turn off random encounters. So that tells me that the developers just want people to play the originals, to see the story for its historical value, and to make a little money off of it as well. This is what the game over screen looks like. Now we're going to continue. Notice there's only 1 save file for this game. Another thing that prevented me as a young child with siblings and a dad who was a gamer from playing this game. On the way back from the Peninsula of Power, we were ambushed by poisonous spiders. We still survived the battle, Miko coming in clutch, but the entire party was poisoned. Now here's a little bit about poison. It can only be cured by the pure potion right now. That's our only way of curing it. And when you walk with poison characters, you take damage with each step you take. You hear that sound? Now this damage will go all the way down to 1 hit point, and then it will stop. Characters will not die walking around the map because of being poisoned. The inn does not cure poison. The only way to cure it is by using a pure potion. And then later in the game you'll get a pure spell that will also cure poison, and the Cure 4 spell restores hit points and removes any negative status effect. Now in the Pixel remaster of this game, the Peninsula of Power was removed and you just fight normal enemies in that area. But that is the Peninsula of Power here on the NES. Now we're ready to get on our boat and head towards our next chapter, but first a little tip. To enter a bonus game, press A and B together 55 times. I like to just hold the A button and spam the B button until it pops up. Here's a little number puzzle where you have to arrange the numbers in order from 1 to 15. Press the B button to return to the game. Solving this puzzle will net you 100 gold in this NES version of the game. The prizes are significantly better in later versions. Now that we have the boat, we can travel the sea, but right now it's really more of a giant lake. We have 5 ports available to us, 2 that are close to Conaria and MATOYA'S cave, the one we are departing from at Pravoka, and then there's one that leads to the Dwarf cave. The other is our next main destination, Elfland. Of all the enemies you fight at sea, the high evasion of the Sahags will be the most annoying. The nice thing about having a port right outside of Conaria is you have quick access to the cheapest inn and the cheapest clinic in the game. I find myself passing Elfland and coming back to Conaria whenever I need to take care of that necessary business. But for now, let's go to the Dwarf Cave first. There's a couple of treasure chests with a nice bit of gold that will help us pay for some things when we get to Elfland. And there's also some information to glean, because, again, you do not need a player's guide to clear this game. Classic RPG 101 is talk to everyone. For example, now we know what happened to MATOYA'S crystal. And after a major event, talk to everyone again. Here's that nice bit of money that will come in handy when we get to Elfland. Now there's a hidden staple in Final Fantasy in this dwarf village. Whenever you talk to a dwarf that says hooray, that was actually supposed to say rally-ho or lally-ho, which is a common dwarf greeting throughout the Final Fantasy series. This is the smithy that makes the best weapon in the game if we can bring him a chunk of adamant. Remember, the town of Melmond is also in the west and in trouble. Some practical advice telling us that bracelets go in the body armor slot. The floater is called Levistone in later versions, thankfully. Now you notice the song that's playing is what has been known or become known as MATOYA'S song, but really it's not MATOYA'S song. I mean, it's named that, it's called MATOYA'S song, but really it applies to every cave that has friendly characters in it. It's just that MATOYA is the first friendly character in a cave that you meet. Yet another door blocked by the Mystic Key. We've gained a lot of information here, but now it's time to head to Elfland. Elfland resisted the growing darkness better than most of the world, in part due to their beloved prince. His honesty, courage, and wisdom were renowned throughout Elfland and in kingdoms as far away as Conaria. But there was one elf named ASTOS, a cousin of the prince, who lived further north and west in a country that fell under the spreading shadow. Over the years, his castle fell into ruins and creatures of darkness made it their abode. And as the shadows deepened on his land, ASTOS fell under their gloomy spell. He began to brood, and soon jealousy crept into his heart. Jealousy over the good fortune of his cousin. Elfland is going to be the biggest town that we have visited yet. And take note that there are 2 different sets of black and white shops, one for level 3 and one for level 4. Here are what the shops in Elfland have to offer. As far as the weapon shop goes, my only recommendation is the saber for your thief, and then the silver sword for your fighter is a no-brainer if you have the money. When it comes to armor, keep in mind that bracelets are one of the few armors that your mages can equip. As far as items go, we have a new item, the house. 3,000 gold pieces, but keep in mind though that it saves your game before it restores your mana points. We also see our 6th consumable item, the soft potion, which cures one character of stone. For your black and white abilities, take note that for the white abilities, only 4 enemies in the game cast mute. And as far as the black abilities go, Lock 2 is badly bugged. It is supposed to make enemies easier to hit, but actually does the reverse and makes them harder to hit. I also recommend getting Fast. It's going to be a very powerful black ability. Now, as we wander through Elfland, there is a particular sight to see in the northeast corner. Now, here's a funny little story. If you played later versions of Final Fantasy, you may have been like me the first time I came up to this tombstone. I thought it was going to say, "Here lies Link." And it does in every other version of the game except for the original NES. So who is Erdrick? Well, if you've played Dragon Quest or the original Dragon Warrior, you would know that Erdrick was, at that time, the ancestor of the main hero. But in Japan, the original Final Fantasy said, "Here lies Link." So I've done a little research on it, and there's a variety of theories out there for the motivation behind this tombstone. Was it a nod to a fellow game developer? Was it a dig at a competitor? I'm not sure. What adds another layer to this is that back in the 80s, Square and Enix were 2 separate companies. Enix was the owner of Dragon Warrior, or Dragon Quest, and then Square's flagship was, of course, Final Fantasy. All I know for sure is the original text in Japanese said, "Here lies Link." When Nintendo brought it to America, it was changed to "Here lies Erdrick." I don't know who enacted that change. And then in subsequent versions of the game, Square put it back to "Here lies Link." There's a line of reasoning in this story that connects to how Final Fantasy got its name, but we can discuss that later. You're going to hear the people in town lament about the Dark Elf, and when we do, we'll make note of that. But have you noticed that I refer to the White Mage as a she? That's a question that's been raised in the past. Is the White Mage a male or a female in this game? The answer is that it doesn't matter. Final Fantasy was created much like Dungeons & Dragons. You pick your own characters, you name your own characters, and you give them your own lore. So you could say all 4 characters are female, your fighter just has a Captain Marvel haircut. And I think that this is a nice technique for immersion, to allow the main characters to be completely neutral and for you to set your own backstory. I think it's more effective and more fun in a multiplayer environment. That way you can take your characters with their own lore and backstory and have them interact with other players' characters that have their own lore and backstory. I think that's one of the reasons why MMOs are so successful. A significant battle. By the way, holding the A button rapidly commands all your characters to fight. Now our characters have started to level up high enough so that our fighter is now hitting enemies more than once in a single hit. 2 hits for the fighter. Additionally, these ogres are worth a fair amount of gold, according to the Nintendo Power Guide. Heading east of Elfland, you'll come across a lot of them, so you can do some farming if you so wish. There are 2 new enemies to be seen out here in the Elfland area, and then a few that we have already seen. This open field right here is where Nintendo Power suggests wandering around to farm ogres for gil, or for gold pieces in this game. Gil is what money was eventually called in the Final Fantasies. Now let's head to Elfland Castle. With his evil band, ASTOS marched on the castle of Elf, defeated the elfish army, and cast a sleeping spell upon the good prince. In this way, the shadow reached even into the heart of Elfland. If you care about canon, I don't know how much of Nintendo Power's fleshed out story is canon, if any of it is. But back in the 80s and throughout the 90s, Nintendo was very involved in promoting all the games on their system, even the ones from different developers. Nintendo really made a culture out of it, especially with Nintendo Power magazine. Now we have enough information at this point, even without the readings of Nintendo Power's story, to make the connection that ASTOS is the Dark Elf. So we're going to make this consolidated note that Matoya and the Prince have the same problem. There's a treasure room in the northeast corner of this castle here, and we're going to show you how to get to it. But have you noticed that when you talk to characters, no matter how prominent or significant the character is, you only get one box of text? In later Final Fantasies, a character's text would cycle through and they would have a lot of things to say. And in more recent Final Fantasies, characters have a ton of things to say. By the way, notice how we turned right as soon as we entered the elf castle and are going around the outside of the castle walls. And guess what? The treasure room is locked by the mystic key. But anyway, back to the dialogue of Final Fantasies. I think it's gotten out of hand. It's gotten flowery and unnecessary, and I kind of wish they would go back to a little bit more simpler text. Now let's head to that northwest castle. On his return journey, ASTOS came upon an old woman in the forest who peered at him through a lens of crystal. "Wicked creature!" she shrieked, making gestures in the air. Ignoring her curses, the dark elf stole the crystal and left her blind in the wilderness. A castle in ruins. No one to talk to but bats? And in the center of the castle, a lone king sits on his throne. We have a new objective there, and there's a treasure room to check out in the bottom left corner of the castle. But let's go back to that tombstone in Elfland. Some argue that the tombstone in Elfland was not a dig at competitors because Square was going out of business and they didn't think they had any competitors. Now, I personally don't believe that story, but that is one story that's out there. Final Fantasy was named such because if it didn't sell well, Square was shutting down. Now, if you know that Sakaguchi, the so-called father of Final Fantasy, gave a different story, don't be haughty towards people who believe this more romantic story. Sakaguchi left Squaresoft because he was dissatisfied. I don't know about you, but I take what dissatisfied employees say with a grain of salt. Additionally, Sakaguchi also said he did not plan for the game to have a sequel. But when convincing Square to publish more than 200,000 copies of Final Fantasy, he said, if we don't make more copies, it will never get a sequel. So, are we really getting the straight story? Plus, the story that Final Fantasy saved Square Enix from going out of business originated with Square employees who were there during the game's development. We're in this fight because the Arachnids give our Black Mage an opportunity to demonstrate Fire 2. It is not only more powerful than Fire, but it also attacks all the enemies, rather than a single target. So that's my argument not to completely discredit the romantic Final Fantasy saved Square Enix story. As we head into the Marsh Cave now, this is our first real dungeon. You may end up going back to town multiple times. We're going to stay at a cabin to recharge our character's hit points, and it's always a good idea in Final Fantasy not to waste your spells on the overworld, but to save as much as you can for the actual dungeon you're about to enter. In the Marsh Cave, on the first floor here, there's no treasure chests, nothing really to see. To the north is a dead end, but there's treasure in that dead end, so we're going to head there first. In the south, the stairs at B lead us towards our objective. Here's a picture of the dead end in the north. The Nintendo Power Guide says that half of these treasure chests are empty, but Mike's RPG Center gives us the straight story. Once we finally get to the second level, there are 3 treasure chests here that are unmarked. They are unmarked because they are empty. Notice how those columns block off access to the bottom right room, except for a little gap in the southern portion of the room. That's where you get through to get past the columns, go through that room, and then enter into C. And then when you go down the stairs at C, the final room of the Marsh Cave, the final level, the only thing you need out of this room to progress the story is at number 10. That's where the crown is. But we'll still pick everything clean that we can. The southern area are all locked by mystic keys. There are 6 new enemies to see, and of these, the most dangerous are the ones that cause poison and paralysis when they attack. I recommend to bring about 15 pure potions with you. The scums are weak to ice and fire, and the mucks are weak to physical attacks. Also, when you get into a fight with an enemy that causes paralysis, they will always attack in a group, which makes them extra dangerous. We will see why in the next upcoming fight. In this group of enemies, 3 of them cause paralysis just by attacking. So imagine that you fought them with 2 of your light warriors fallen. There's only 2 left. They can keep both light warriors paralyzed for the entire fight, leading to a slow and painful game over. The next random encounter shows us a new status effect. After we talk to the bats, I just can't help myself. These enemies cause darkness when they attack you. Now, their attacks don't do a lot of damage, but the darkness status effect lowers your hit percentage by 20%, making it harder to hit the enemies. It also makes you 20% easier for the enemies to hit. You can dispatch them quickly with Harm or Fire 2 because they don't have a lot of hit points. Now, the next random encounter coming up is a significant one, and it gives me an opportunity to nerd out a little bit. The scums have the highest possible absorb in the game. That's 255 points of absorb. And if you're not a programmer, you may look at that and say, why 255? Why not an even number like 100 being the max, or even 200 being the max? Why 255? Well, it is a programming thing, and I'm not a programmer, but I do at least understand that 255 is a cap, if you will. It is a limit. Now, the thing that's cool about this is that hexadecimal, also used in programming, is a numbering system that's used to represent large numbers with fewer digits. Guess how 255 is represented? That's right, FF. The same initials as Final Fantasy. Now, this is not the reason why 255 is the cap in this game. Like I said, it's a programming thing. Many games have a cap of 255. But that brings me to the other story, the more realistic story, for how Final Fantasy got its name. Final Fantasy was made after Dragon Quest. They were making a game that was to be like Dragon Quest, an RPG. And by the time they were developing this game, Dragon Quest had already developed a nickname by its initials. People were calling it DQ. The developers of Final Fantasy wanted a similar, easy nickname for people to refer to their game by. So FF came up before the name. They knew they wanted the name to be FF. I don't think FF rolls off the tongue as easily as just calling it Final Fantasy, but that's just me. They originally wanted to call the game Fighting Fantasy, but that name was already taken. It was copyrighted. So they had to think of something else. Now, the more cynical view is that they would have taken anything as long as it started with FF. But at the same time, Sakaguchi said that this was going to be his last game before he went back to college. He wasn't planning on making any more games after this. So here's what I think happened. Square may not have been lighting the world on fire with their games, but I don't think they were going bankrupt. When the team came to present the name Fighting Fantasy and were told it was copyrighted, Sakaguchi thought about his situation and going back to college, so they picked Final Fantasy. And then after development was finished, they realized that they had a really good product, and that's why he went and convinced Square to publish more games, because he saw the potential for a sequel at that point. But the world may never truly know, except for that core development team that was there in that relatively small company called Square. Now on this second floor, heading towards the crown, remember all of these columns or pillars, they block our path. In the Pixel Remaster, they actually separated these pillars so that you could walk to that room much easier.
Is this easy? mode.
But in this game, we go through the southern opening, we go through this room, and then we enter the stairway. Now there's plenty of treasures in this room. We're not going to go through all of them. I did pick up all of the treasures, but we'll just skip ahead to the fight. This is what happens if you try to equip the wrong class with the wrong equipment. On our way to the crown, there's a treasure chest that is going to be trapped. Now, in future installments of Final Fantasy, the trap springs when you open the chest. But in this version, original, NES, the trap springs when you walk on the floor in front of the treasure chest. So before we enter this room, we're going to do one more check at how everyone is looking. We got in a few fights between the stairway and here. We're going to use Heal. Cow's ability Heal cures the entire party all at once. It's like giving everyone a cure spell. As we go to battle against these wizards, they're really not magical enemies because they don't use any attack spells against you, but they do hit you hard and they resist most elements. That's why the best move is Lit 2. Not because they're weak to lightning, but because that's the only element they are not resistance to. So Lit 2 is going to soften them up, and we're going to finish them off with our physical attacks. You see how hard they hit. Our fighter, who normally takes 1 point of damage, took 22. We use Invisible to increase Omaru's evasion percentage, but this is why I don't like to use these abilities. I just wasted a spell on something that didn't work. I don't like to use percentage chance abilities. I like to use abilities that I know work, so I don't really use Invis or spells like that too often. Now you could say that Invis stacks with itself, so the more you cast it on someone, the more likely they are to dodge, but that's if they live that long. So I just like to stick with spells and abilities that work, not just spells and abilities that increase chances, that are so reliant on RNG. There's that heal spell in action. I really was pushing it in this fight. I probably should have gone back to town and recharged one more time, but I thought I could make it, and I do. I do make it through this boss fight, and I do pick the cave clean of everything except what is locked behind the Mystic Key doors. Alright, finally able to grab the crown. But now, we have to get out of this cave. We have to fight our way out. And so we did, but unfortunately, Miko and Omaru did not survive the exit trip. So it falls to Shao and Cow to make their way back towards civilization. Remember that Coneria is the most budget-friendly place to bring back your allies and rest at the inn. Now that we are rested and recharged, it's time to take the crown back to the Northwest Castle. Now we're going to stop and check ourselves because a boss fight is coming up. We return the crown to the Lonely King. The king reveals his true identity. The source of problems for both Matoya and the prince. The Dark Elf fight is a fight that is repeated in future Final Fantasies, and this is the first fight of this game that, to me, truly calls for strategy. The Dark Elf has an electric attack and a fire-based attack, so we're going to use A-Lit to protect ourselves from those electric-based attacks. We're also going to have our Black Mage use Fast on our fighter. That way Shal will do double the attacks when he hits the Dark Elf. 4 hits per attack instead of 2. You'll see me pause for a moment to try to give Invis one more shot, or just use Fog that I know will increase defense. And I decide to give Invis one more shot. Now Omaru has already given Fast to the fighter, so he's going to focus on the attack magic. There it is, 4 hits and critical. Let's see what that does. Now, in future installments of Final Fantasy, there's an ability called Death. In this game, it's called Rub. I assume it's because you're rubbing the target out of existence. And unfortunately for the Dark Elf, he uses it. And just like that, our tank is down. Not just our tank, but probably our primary damage dealer at this point. So it falls on Miko, Kao, and Omaru, who wrapped it up nicely. And here's a nice opportunity for the time that the others have spent fallen in battle to get a little experience divided from Shal's death this time. Although I don't think Kao has fallen. She's really raking in the experience points. Omaru is the king now? No, we can't have a Black Mage as our party lead. He'll get eaten alive. We'll put our Thief at the top, and then our White Mage in the second spot because she has more hit points. Miko is the king now. Okay, now let's head out and head back to MATOYA'S because we have obtained her crystal from ASTOS. Now this is the point in Final Fantasy where I start enjoying myself, because rather than finding something for the 3 other light warriors to do while the fighter does the damage and takes the damage from the enemies, each one has an ability now. All 4 light warriors will contribute to each battle. The Thief is doing decent damage, the White Mage does good damage and has a lot of curative and defensive abilities, and the Black Mage has a variety of offensive abilities that he can use in big and small groups. And that's the thing, for all the bugs that this game has, one of the things that they got right was the elemental system as far as attacking and defending go. And I think that's one of the reasons why this game does so well. Every time I play a game that utilizes the elemental system, I enjoy it. Just think Final Fantasy or Pokemon or any of the others that use that system. It's just an effective and fun system to put into a video game. You'll see here now that long drag of multiple enemies fighting cut way down because the Black Mage now has a powerful ability that affects an entire group. Omaru is really shining at this point in the game. He even landed a physical attack. Now remember, we've taken out Elfland's reason for suffering, but we can't go there yet because we need to get to MATOYA and give her the crystal eye back so that she can give us the herb that will wake the sleeping prince. Then Elfland's issues will be resolved. Such a simple fix. We passed up Elfland because Conaria is the place to revive your allies and rest at the inn while saving money. Shal is back in the party, and he is proud of his traveling companions for handling business without him. Now we will work our way towards MATOYA'S cave. We're going to take the boat to do so because we travel faster. And this fight right here is a significant one. This guy, Kaizoku, he is worth a lot of money. And you can encounter 5 or 6 of these guys at a time. And that will give you a nice paycheck. They're not very difficult to defeat either. There is actually a way to manipulate the game to make them appear. But if you ever see them, always take them out. You will be glad you did. We can go underneath that bridge to get to the port that leads us closer to MATOYA'S cave, and the next fight is a significant one, for personal reasons. The Mad Pony used to be scary when we encounter it. Now we can dispatch him so quickly. It's nice in these games when you go back to the earlier areas to see just how far you've come. Just like in life. It's nice to see some things that at one point in time appeared daunting, to come back after you've done some personal growth, and they don't seem so bad. Back in MATOYA'S cave, all we have to do is talk to her to return the crystal eye. She gives us the herb to take to the sleeping prince. And she's ready for us to go, so let's get out of here. This is going to be a nice opportunity to really clean up our notes on the left side of the screen. We're going to cut down on a lot of them. Now you may have noticed that I'm not attaching a lot of my little markers of enemies that appear in future Final Fantasies, except for certain significant ones. That's because 90% of the enemies in this game repeat themselves throughout the series in one way, shape, or form. So the ones that have a particular significant impact on the story of future games are the ones that I'm marking. We go straight to Elfland Castle. They don't recognize that we have the herb. So to them it's just another day of the prince sleeping. Don't talk to the prince to trigger the event. Talk to his attendant. Then talk to the prince. Prince is acting like David after the dentist.
Is this real life?
Now that's one more thing off of our list. The Sleeping Prince and MATOYA have both been resolved. But now we have the Mystic Key, which means that we can open up the different locked rooms. Most of these rooms, all of these rooms, have treasure in them. But I like to talk to the NPCs after an event to see how they've reacted to what's going on. And there's a clue of what the next step in our quest is. Whenever you push against an NPC that is in your way, if you want to try to get them out of the way, keep pushing in their direction and they move quickly out of your way. Hopefully they decide to move out of your way. That's a nice advantage that is not put in all RPGs. Now we're going to shift our notes from the left side of the screen to the right. There are 6 locations with locked doors that require the Mystic Key to open, starting with the one here in Elfland. We have a new hammer for Cal. Got some money, and some gauntlets for our fighter that will soon become obsolete. But how are we going to get the rest of these treasures? By a montage! Alright, so now we're going to take our 1,020 gold pieces from this chest, and before we go to the final area with the Mystic Key, I want to show you that I have been able to purchase every level spell that I can fill for the White Mage and the Black Mage, as well as every piece of equipment that is relevant and useful from Elfland without doing any farming for gil or grinding for experience. Just heading towards my quest and going back to town when needed to recharge, I've been able to see everything that the town has to offer. And we have quite a few pieces of gear that we have picked up from these Mystic Key locked doors. We had the Iron Helm, we just picked up the Dragon Blade, here's another Silver Dagger, a Wooden Helm. So now as we pick up every one of these chests, let's take a look at what we have been able to bring in. It seems like quite a haul at first glance, right? Now the Dragon Sword, the Weir Sword, and the Rune Sword are all supposed to be effective against a specific enemy type, but due to a bug in the game, none of the special weapon characteristics work. So the only thing we can go by is how much damage they do and their hit percentage, which really reduces the usefulness of everything except the Rune Sword because the thief can equip it. All the other weapons are outshined by the Silver Sword that we already purchased in Elfland, although the Silver Dagger and the Silver Hammer are going to our Black and White Mages respectively. What I am currently equipped with is what I'm keeping for the next chapter. Everything else has been sold or will be sold. Now when it comes to the armor that we have picked up, like we said before, the fighter's iron gauntlets are better than the copper gauntlets that we found at first. The iron helmet is also better, but the silver armor, which sounds like it should be better than iron, actually has less absorb than the iron armor, but a lower evade percentage penalty. So if we had a red mage in the party, the silver armor would be a perfect fit. But for now, with this party setup, it is getting sold along with the wooden helmets. We ended our little search for the treasures in the dwarf cave so that we could give the TNT to Narek. Now you're going to see me stand still for a few seconds after he's gone, because when I beat this game, originally it was on the PlayStation and there was a cutscene here. So this is me waiting for that cutscene to happen. But in the original NES, he just walks away and your next quest objective opens up. As I am wont to do, I'm going to talk to all the other villagers here to see what dialogue has changed since I gave Narek the TNT. Nothing new there. This guy says something different. We already know about the blacksmith. There's a jolly fellow with a happy greeting. Now this guy mentions a canal. Let's step outside and see what he's talking about. We walk a little bit to the south, and a path has now been opened that connects this great lake, the Aldi Sea, with the wide open ocean. So we'll hop on our boat and make our way into Chapter 3.